Hello, my name is Juan Senda. I am an osteopath and a yoga teacher. First of all, let me tell you that in the description you'll find links to both in-person and online courses. And on June 21st, we're holding an online anatomical yoga workshop. Today we're going to talk about why we do extension poses in yoga. Let's go to the screen. We have fewer extension poses compared to forward bends. Therefore, we find ourselves with a type of asana that goes against our natural tendencies. In other words, the body is not as well prepared in terms of joints for extensions as it is for forward bends. That's why the body doesn't really like bending backward. But on the other hand, we need to do it. In a natural, survival-based life, we would only extend ourselves when we had to pick fruit from trees or look up at the sky. The rest of the time, we look down at the ground, for hunting or gathering. This has led to a type of joint movement that is more adapted to forward bends. In a yoga class, when we do them, we find more resistance among the students, but with proper practice and correct alignment, these are the poses that help us achieve better flexibility in the spine. When we practice backbending postures, we push the vertebrae. When bending forward, the vertebrae open at the front and close at the back, especially the lumbar and cervical vertebrae that are connected. That's why prior elongation is vitally important. First, we stretch, we do an elongation, and then we do the back bends to avoid compressing the vertebrae. But this happens in all types of postures, but especially and even more so in back bends. Why is that? To avoid compression of the intervertebral discs. These types of postures carry the risk, so to speak, of vertebral and disc compression, but if done correctly, they help to make the spine more flexible, thus preventing joint blockage. That's why we find that it's important to practice these types of postures, but to do so mindfully in order to avoid spinal injuries, especially in people who already suffer from conditions like osteoarthritis or herniated discs. When practicing extensions, it's not just about seeking prior elongation, but we also have to pay attention to bilateral alignment. That means making sure the ankles are aligned and in the correct position, that the knees are also properly aligned, not turning inward or outward, nor rotated. The same goes for the iliac crests and, of course, the shoulders. If we have proper alignment beforehand, the extensions will be pure. Otherwise, what we'll create is a twist, a joint imbalance, because in these types of postures, the joints of the spinal column can suffer shearing of the cartilage and discs. When we perform, for example, Ustrasana, which is an intense back bend, we stretch the anterior muscle chain. Obviously, we need to do a preliminary stretch. We are stretching from the soles of the feet up to the neck, such as the length of the neck or the sternocleidomastoid muscles. This muscle chain is used to being tense because we tend to lean forward. And when we stretch it, it helps with postural realignment. On the other hand, we need to maintain balance with the posterior muscle chain. It is the one that will support the structure, which in this case is tonic, so that the compensation and support of the posture are correct. The posterior chain pulls backward and the anterior chain allows itself to be stretched. If we have a muscular imbalance, for example, if the posterior chain pulls too much and the anterior chain does not allow itself to be stretched, the discs and joints become compressed. Because if we compress here and compress because the anterior musculature does not allow it, the ones that will suffer are the joints. The organs that are in the posterior part, that is, the kidneys, are compressed when we perform an extension. Organs and glands need compression. Thank you. To expel accumulated toxins, in this case, we help to filter and expel the urea that comes from the liver. And then the decompression. In this case, we do an extension to compress the kidneys, and we would do a flexion to decompress them. On the other hand, the rest of the organs are expanded when we do an extension, allowing new blood to enter and oxygenate the cells and organic tissues, enabling an expansion and a sponginess of the organs involved. The glands that are compressed are the adrenal glands, which release adrenaline and cortisol, both of which are linked to stress management. The parathyroid glands, which are located on the back of the thyroids, are also compressed, facilitating their function. These are linked to the body's calcium levels. The rest of the glands, such as the thyroid, thymus, pancreas, and gonads, are expanded, allowing fresh blood to enter for better functioning. The stretches allow for the release of the diaphragm, which is the main respiratory muscle, and the intercostals, which are the secondary respiratory muscles. This release of the respiratory muscles enables the rib cage to expand more effectively, and the lungs have more space to expand, allowing for better air intake into the alveoli. On one hand, as we've said, stretches allow for the compression of the kidneys, which are linked to fears, and on the other hand, we are expanding the lungs, which are connected to emotions such as sadness. These types of postures are very emotional, and it may be that a feeling of sadness becomes trapped. Thank you. If you don't allow the chest to open, the extension becomes less effective, and it's very common to experience sensations of emotional release when we do backbending postures. If we want the energy to move upward, that is pranavayu, we need to apply Mula Bandha, so that the energy can rise and back bends release the diaphragm, which is an energetic lock. In this way, prana has a clear path to reach the upper energetic triangle. By passing through the diaphragm, we are unlocking it. Anahata chakra, the fourth chakra, which is an electromagnetic vortex, is very emotional, since these emotions are an obstacle. In other words, emotional regulation or balance is an obstacle to energetic and spiritual liberation. For the postures to have their effect, at a minimum, they must be practiced for 1 to 3 minutes, since we first encounter resistance from the anterior muscle chain, which does not like to be stretched. The brain has to communicate with this muscle chain, and in turn, it must relax in order to stretch. On the other hand, blood circulation is responsible for transporting nutrients and oxygen to the muscles, as well as expelling carbon dioxide. Since blood circulation takes approximately 3 minutes to make a full round through the body, if we don't allow enough time, the nutrients and oxygen won't reach the muscles and they won't relax, since they tend to remain toned and tense. For extensions, we first need to lengthen the spine. Before performing the extension, we seek, starting from the navel point, from the pelvic floor, to lift the entire torso. And then, slowly, with the exhalation, not with the inhalation, but with the exhalation, we begin to lean backward, which is the extension. Once we have achieved the extension, with long and deep breathing, without losing alignment or the engagement of the leg muscles, which in this case are active, we allow the abdominal muscles to relax, and when coming out of the pose, we also seek lengthening with the inhalation, and then we release. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.